we are starting again our practice. So our first speaker this year is going to be Albert Diaz Guilera from University of Barcelona. So as usual, let me introduce a little bit our speakers. So Albert got his PhD in the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, so another one. And then he had a couple of postdoctoral staying, one in Leiden and the other in Sherbrooke in Canada. And currently is the chairman of the Department of Fundamental Physics at the University of Barcelona and the president of the Catalan Association for the Study of Complex Systems. You are not anymore?
We're not anymore.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. We should update the webpage.
I was, you have to update.
Now, he's a statistical physicist, and as we know very well, statistical physicists can work in any possible field, and is not an exception. So he worked in biology, economy, social sciences, computer science, and even linguistics. And today he's going to present a colloquium on synchronization in complex networks, dynamics, symmetries, and applications. Albert, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for this very nice introduction. So I hope that my voice will resist for the full time of the seminar. I am very pleased to be here as part of the school, in which, of course, I have to thank the real organizers of the event. I am one of the organizers, but we are the fake organizers, so the real organizers are here. And it's really a pleasure to be here today to talk about this topic of synchronization, which is a very wide topic and then has had a lot of different applications in many diverse fields. And I will try to cover some aspects of the research that we have done in our group in Barcelona, and then so many collaborations in different places that cover, let's say, the two main topics of the school, which is, let's say, the relation between motion and synchronization, so how motion is affected, or how the synchronization is affected by the motion of the agents that can induce this synchronization, and also in my very modest contribution to synchronization in the brain. Of course, I will talk about the Kuramoto model, and then also as the previous speaker in the school was saying, that Jesus Gomez Gardeñes, that the Kuramoto model is a very rough, let's say, approach to brain dynamics, but it can be very useful in order to understand how nonlinearities, how complexity appears in, let's say, systems with a given topology, and in particular, we were focusing how the interplay of dynamics, topology, complex networks, how all this stuff you put it together and how you bring to a new, let's say, new characterization of different systems that can be cast in terms of statistical physics. Well, having said so, this is the outline of my presentation. So I will first try to point you on why, as let's say, physicists, as statistical physicists, we deal with synchronization. I'm going to introduce briefly the Kuramoto model that can be useful for the rest of my talk. And then I will talk about, as I was saying, about these two main topics, that it's about mobile oscillators, and then going, let's say, in this case, going to the brain, moving to the brain, because in the applications to the brain, then we realize that synchronization is not, let's say, synchronization is important, but perhaps it is even more important, the lack of synchronization. Because in the brain, having a brain which is completely synchronized are not so good news, because then it's related to some kind of seizures in the brain. So that's the reason for which I put here at the end that to sync or not to sync, so in which case we can be interested in one thing or just in the other, and then which is the role in this case of the symmetries that we can have in a given system. Okay, actually, when we talk about synchronization, synchronization is let's say, it's a phenomenology that is very familiar to any of us. So synchronization can be associated to do something together at the same pace. So we can sing, we can, not me for sure, but we can sing, we can dance, and then trying to do these things all together. We have seen some examples of the fireflies in the forest of South Asia, and we have seen many different examples in many different, let's say, disciplines. And for those that come from this complex system perspective, is something very appealing because it's one of the paradigmatic examples of cooperative process among members of a given population. So you have a population, and then this population are doing things together. And then one of these things can be just doing something together at the same rhythm, at the same pace. And okay, and then this is what we understand as synchronization. Well, the key is in how the individuals interact. And then because this interaction gives rise to a kind of a coherent behavior in terms of the time activity. But the important news is that this is some collective activity that, and we, in complex systems, we use this word and say that it emerges. And in this case, emergence means something new, so some properties that are not related to the individual behavior of the parts that form the system, but it's associated to the fact that the system as a whole has new properties. Synchronization is a property of the system. An individual cannot be synchronized with itself. It has no sense to talk about this individual synchronization. And then, so, as I was saying before, then we observe nature in many different examples, and then from neural systems to the brain. As I was saying before, let's say that synchronization associated with some epileptical seizures. We see synchronization in physics because talking about oscillators, talking about rhythms, talking about waves is something very common in physics, but it's also common in sociology. So there are some examples that how people can clap together at the end of a play, or how people can walk together along a bridge. This is what happened some time ago in this Millennium Bridge in London, for instance. It was because of synchronization that the bridge was almost collapsing. And even in communication, so we can have several keys on how people talk to each other or how people communicate that can be done also in this way. Well, I cannot resist to put a couple of examples, a couple of very, very simple videos that you can find in YouTube, anywhere. Let me see. Okay, this is a very famous one. So it's people, these guys were doing this experiment. So it's 64 metronomes, very well placed on this platform. Okay, I will try to skip part of it. But you see that how, from the beginning, they start putting these, let's say, these metronomes out of the equilibrium position, and then when you see, then you see these oscillations, and then these oscillations are transmitted through the table that it's on below them. There are some conditions that Jesus was pointing in the previous talk, but at the end, what you get, at least in this experiment, is that you get all these metronomes exactly, let's say, oscillating with exactly the same velocity, and not only with the same velocity, because this is important, but they have exactly the same phase. Understanding in this case the phase, the position in the space. So they are moving with the same velocity, but if you make a snapshot in this evolution, you would see that all of them are exactly in the same position. But let's put another example, so I will stop this one. This other example is about, so you see here there are just very small devices, and then these devices just send a signal to the device that it's next to them. And then here you can see that depending on the position of these devices, what you get is a kind of a synchronization that all the devices, you see that there is just a rhythm in which you change the colors and so, but then depending on the position of these devices, you can change, you can move them away, then you can realize that actually in these devices, you can observe different patterns. And here pattern means that, of course, I can see all these units, let's say, putting the blue all together, but now you see that how, for instance, there are some circumstances in which you see a kind of wave flowing in this system, and then it is because the system has a different, we could say, a different attractor, a different state, which is not exactly, you see how there is this pattern that moves along this direction. So synchronization is important, but then we have to be aware from the beginning that this is not the only thing that we can expect in this type of systems in which they change this type of information. Okay, How we model, because, so this is something for which, let's say, physicists, it's said that physicists are very good for modeling, so this is something that we used to do. And okay, then if we want to model this synchronization, we want to model how these emergent properties appear, how these emergent properties show up, then we need to make some kind of, let's say, simple model. And for us, a simple model is the model that has the minimum ingredients. And then in this case, the minimum ingredients that we want to have is that we need units that have some dynamics. That's clear. So we need units that do something, that may have some time evolution. We don't care about which is the type evolution that they have. We need some interaction, because the interaction is the key. So we need the units that form the system to have some sort of interaction among them. And finally, is the topology. We need not only how the units interact with their neighbors, but we need to know who are their neighbors. And then knowing these three basic principles, then perhaps we can make a model, and then in this model, we can show that one of the possible, let's say, collective behaviors of this very simple system can be this of synchronization. And then we expect that with these ingredients, this synchronization emerges.
Sorry, Albert, I have a question. I'm here.
Okay.
When you say topology, you refer in general to geometry or topology in the sense...
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the point. Okay, when I talk about topology, I talk about how the units in the... You can imagine you have a network, and then how the units are interacting among them. Not the topology in a geometrical sense, but then it's topology which concerns how the units are interacting, how the units are connected. Okay. Yes, I probably this is a question of language that provides, it's an abuse of language from our side, and then that can make this misunderstanding. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, then what about the dynamics? So the dynamics is, okay, if we want to see something that we synchronize, well, the most basic idea is to consider some sort of periodic behavior, and then this is what we try, and then this periodic behavior can be forced in two ways. One that can be induced by some external signal, or it can be internal, that there is some kind of internal clock in the unit that generates this internal dynamics. Well, then this internal dynamics, of course, then you have some internal variable that describes the evolution of the system, of the unit. And then in this case, since we are dealing with oscillatory systems, the most basic thing is to talk about the phase. So we need just a single variable to describe the state of the unit. And then this is the reason for which we choose the phase. And then is it true? Well, in some systems, which basically you have in a more complicated system, we can have limit cycles. And then actually in these limit cycles, we know that there is always some stable trajectory around these limit cycles. And then we can always, let's say, remove some of the degrees of freedom in our units, and then just concentrate on the behavior of a single variable, which in this case is the phase. How do they interact? So then this is very important to specify how they interact. They can do it in two. Actually, they can do it in many different ways, but basically we can classify them in two ways. One is that we would say pulse-like. Pulse-like means that we have the units, and then we have the units that make some evolution, and then because of some internal condition, this unit sends a pulse, sends a signal to its neighbors. Okay, and then this happens in a very short time scale, okay? But then this signal is integrated by the neighbors, and then the neighbors react to this signal that they have received, okay? But it can be also continuous. Continuous in the sense that this is perhaps an idealization on how these systems are interacting, because then we can say, okay, we have two systems, and then these systems are characterized by some variables, and they exchange information continuously. And then what happens is that the interaction between them is, you can describe them in terms of differential equations, and then these differential equations are continuous in time, and then you are taking this interaction in a continuous way. Okay, then the two possibilities, you can make it, you can choose, and it is precisely in physics, it is just a problem of time scales. This is, you have to distinguish very clearly which is the time scale of the evolution of your system. Whether the interaction between the units is very fast, or it is slow, or it is comparable with the dynamics of the units themselves. Only according to this, then you can choose the appropriate model. In the case that we are dealing, so now, from now on, I will concentrate in this Kuramoto model, because it was a very successful model that Yoshiki Kuramoto proposed in 1975. I don't try to go to a Google Scholar and to see how many references his book can have, because it can be probably hundreds of thousands. And so actually he proposed this model that, you look, it has precisely the type of ingredients that we were considering before. Then in this, okay. So you see, here's the equation. So this equation gives you how the evolution of how the phase of a single unit evolves according to two single terms. One term is this omega I is the intrinsic frequency of the unit. So then every unit can have a different intrinsic frequency because it's a characteristic of the unit. And then the key is in the interaction. The interaction is according to the sinus of the phase difference. And what does this interaction mean? This interaction means that's very, very simple, is that if you are behind, so oscillator I is behind oscillator J, oscillator I will try to get into the same phase as oscillator J. And also the other way around, if it's advanced, they will try to go back. And then, because of the symmetry of the system, it can happen in the two directions. So actually, the term in the right means that all the oscillators will try to follow all the rest of the population. Given in this, let's say, qualitative picture, what we can say, and then what happens with the other term, the intrinsic frequency makes that all the individual oscillators forget about the others, forget about the interaction with the rest of the population, and then they will try to go around with the same frequency. Then we have let's say, two different contributions. One contribution which is go around and then separate from the phases of your neighbors because you are moving with a different velocity, or the other term which means, no, follow the others, not follow the leader because there is no leaders here, but just following the other oscillators. Then these two terms compete. And actually, this was the original model in which he was proposing what we, in terms of topology, in terms of interactions, we call all-to-all topology. It means that they were considering at the beginning, I'm talking about 1975, that there was no network, there's no lattice, mean field. In physics, mean field was was of the most hot topics on that time. And then looking around, and I look all my neighbors as if they were the same. It was a kind of field. Then looking at this contribution, it is actually what I was saying. So then this Kij in the more general model, Kij is to leave some, let's say, degrees of freedom to understand how the nodes are connected. But basically, this is what I was saying before, that when k is equal to 0, you have all the oscillators going around with its own velocity or with its own frequency. But at some point, when k is larger than 0, then what you expect is that there are some interactions. Perhaps these interactions are not yet strong enough, but then you have some. So these interactions make that there appears, it emerges a kind of global behavior. You don't need, at the beginning, you don't need that this global behavior affects all the oscillators, all the units in your system, but perhaps it will affect only those units that are close enough. So those units that have very, very close frequencies, we can say that they will locally synchronize easier. But then if you keep increasing this k, then you are breaking the equilibrium, you get breaking the balance, and then you are moving to the region where there is a value of k much larger, and then you have more and more oscillators that are going together. Okay? So actually, in terms of k, what we observe is a kind of transition from an incoherent state to a synchronized state, and then this, as in all phase transitions that we know in physics, this transition is characterized by an order parameter. And the order parameter of the Kuramoto model is this R here. So this R is a kind of average of the different phases of the oscillators in the system. Okay, you can see the oscillators. You can see this picture here on the right. If the oscillators are, let's say, widespread distributed along this unit circle, then you can imagine that the sum of this imaginary exponential of the phases, if they are very widely distributed on the circle, this sum is very close to 0. But on the other hand, when you have all the oscillators which start to group in a region of this unit circle, then if you make this kind of vectorial sum of the phases of them considered as a vector, then you can see that in this case the order parameter will start to be different from 0. Then what you observe is that when there is a value of k, below which the order parameter is basically 0, and there is one value of k in which then you have a kind of transition that makes, as I was saying before, that the oscillators start to group together. If you keep increasing k, then every time they are more closely packed in this representation in the unit circle. And then the value of k is given by this.
Sorry,
okay.
But the transition that you are picturing is global. So once you go beyond, let's say, the critical kappa, the critical k, all the oscillators are synchronized because it's all to all, I guess, right?
No, the problem is that in order to show this value is you need to be in the thermodynamic limit. And then in this case, in the thermodynamic limit, the phase transition is very well defined. You have a very particular value of k at which you have the value. You can say it in terms of the solution, that there is a value above which then there is a solution which is different from 0. But actually then it means that you can keep increasing k. If you keep increasing k, then the order parameter keeps increasing as well. So this is a second order phase transition, and that's it. But this is an exactly phase transition. You can see and how it diverges because it's computed in the thermodynamic limit. When you look at simulations also, then you see that it's not so, let's say, and then it's weakened. Okay, well. Then here is, I have put a short video. I recommend you to, if you are interested in this, go to Google and you look for this word here, Ride My Kuramoto Cycle. I hope that you will remember it easily. So this will bring you to a page which is very nice. It's part of a project which is called Complexity Explorables, that it was designed by Dirk Brockman, and then you can see there a lot of interactive simulations which are related to complex systems. In particular, you will get this. So I cannot go directly because then I have problems of communication, but I can show you just a very short video that I was recording. You see, let's stop. Let's stop the video, not the simulation. Okay. So here, you see that you have all the oscillators going around because they are changing the phase according to some frequency. Then you see here in the center, you see this big red dot. This red dot corresponds to the order parameter. So the order parameter has polar coordinates, and then because of the phase, and then also has a radius. And actually, what we are interested is in the length of this distance. Okay, so we are not so interested in the red angle. And okay, then you see if you now start to increase the coupling between the units, then what do you get? Then you see You see all these units going together, going together, going together. But then you can see in the middle how the order parameter, now it's approaching the cloud of these oscillators. It's clear because, so now then most of them are equal, and then it's just following this trend. Excuse me? I think that the width, you can look at the instructions here. I think that the width corresponds to, I don't remember if the, let's say, of the color or the width, it corresponds to the intrinsic frequency of the oscillator. I don't remember now the details. So you can take a look on this if you are interested, and then you can understand some of these behaviors. Okay, as I was saying you, this is the mean field, and then the good point from the solution at that time is that this could be solved analytically, in the sense that this value of the critical value of the connectivity of the strength of the coupling can be computed analytically in the thermodynamic limit, and then you can compare with the experiments. So it was the big success of this model that this was computed. I will skip the details. You have them here, and I will go. But it's a very simple demonstration that shows you which are actually the power of this of this model. That with just these very simple ingredients, it can explain a new type of complexity appearing in the existing world. But at the same time, let's say, 50 years later, we know, of course, that it has some limitations. Okay, so 1975, everybody was talking about mean field, global coupling. Then let's turn 25 years later, complex networks are introduced because of some seminal works of some of our colleagues in our community, very well known. And okay, what can we do? So what can we do now with this problem of synchronization? It was a very popular model that was analyzed in many detail, in many different settings. And of course, one of the first things to look at was, okay, then let's put some complex topology in this Kuramoto model, and then to see what happens. And then, in this case, so we have to say that we have heterogeneity in the natural frequencies, but now we are introducing, if we are talking about complex networks, we are introducing an additional heterogeneity, which in this case is about the pattern of connections in the system. Of course, now the feeling is that more heterogeneity, the system will be more difficult to synchronize. Okay, and then this is the case. And but the nice point is that now we have new ingredients. And also we have new ways to characterize the system. And then it came among the first contributions in this, which was one of the contributions by Jesus, Alex, and Yamil. So I remember your discussions in Tarragona when I was often there about this work. So in here, what they were showing is that why? So what complex networks now are adding to this problem of synchronization? Okay, and then I will go back to this question. Okay, so then we go to complex. We go later to this contribution. So actually, when you introduce these complex networks, so the first you have to introduce new things. A proper normalization, because in the mean field is very clear. What is the mean field now? So how we can define the mean field, and then also about now a proper choice of the order parameter, because it's not clear at all which is the kind of a phase transition that we can have when we have a complex network. Because actually now you know that when you have a complex network, that things are not so clear to be homogeneous. You have your distribution, you have your complex network, and then depending in different areas in your system, you can have very different behaviors, and then perhaps things are locally different. Okay, this is the proper normalization, the proper mean field, as I was saying. For instance, you have here 3 different choices of the order parameter. One is the local order parameters. So it's the order parameter that locally every oscillator sees. There is another which is the global, which is a kind of a weighted average. And there is even another one which is related not with the phases, but with the frequencies. Because now, when looking at this type of system, we didn't say this before, but when we talk about synchronization, we usually, there are two ways in which we talk about synchronization. I think in the talk by Ulrike, it was also clear that you can have phase synchronization, but you can also have frequency synchronization. So you can have the two types of synchronization, and actually the phase synchronization is much stronger than the frequency synchronization, because the phase synchronization implies as well the frequency synchronization, but not the other way around. Okay, but then for this reason, it's sometimes important also to introduce other types. Okay, so this was the slide that I was waiting for. So in this case, what is clear is that when you start increasing the coupling constant, now this transition is not so clean, not so neat, because it depends not only on the distribution of frequencies, it depends on which are the frequencies of your neighbors. How are the correlations between the position of the nodes, the connections of the nodes, and the frequencies? You have quantities that are associated to some probability distribution. The strength of the nodes, the frequencies, but how these distributions correlate. This is a very important point. And then that's the reason for which, just for a brief comparison, the most simple thing that you can see, and also it was also clear in one of the talks by Ulrike, that this path to synchronization that you were showing in these Erdős-Renyi networks, but in this case, it was shown that for the Barabasi-Albert or for the Erdős-Renyi, which are two of the most paradigmatic examples of complex networks, the evolution towards the synchronized state is very, very different. In one case, it's more related to the effect of the hubs, as you can expect from the Barabasi-Albert model, and in the other, it's more how you keep, you could say, like in a social network, how are you increasing the friendship with your neighboring nodes, in the sense that how you are collecting into your neighbor nodes and how you are increasing the number of your friends. So this is typical. Then another, let's say, interesting point when we talk about complex networks is related to the different types of structures, different type of organizations that appear in a complex network. And then one of these is what are called communities. Communities was a very hot topic 15 years ago, perhaps 20 years ago. And it was how real networks are organized to form different types of clusters. So we know that, for instance, in a social network, we have our close friends, we have our family, we have friends. We have different types of links in this social network. And then these different type of links make that we make different types of clusters, different types of communities. And then that's the reason for which this community structure was, let's say, one of the topics in the study of complex networks. And then, okay, this is one characterization. So one of the interesting things is that communities are hierarchically organized, in the sense that communities are organized within communities, and so you can have communities at a very different scales. So, and then actually, at that point, we were working a lot on this community problem, but at the same time, we had been also working a lot on this Kuramoto model, and then we realized that it was the right point in order to merge these two different topics, which is, okay, why don't we try the Kuramoto model in order to characterize the structure of the network? And so actually, this is the paper, so it was our contribution at that time. And actually here our idea was precisely this, so to exploit the dynamical properties of the Kuramoto model in terms of what I was saying. So what is synchronization? Synchronization at the end is just something that you do with your neighbors. So then, if you are very close to your neighbors, you will synchronize better. And just the other way around, if you synchronize better, it is because then you are very close to some of the nodes. Then in this case, there is one ingredient that we introduce here, of course, is a simplification, which is forget about the frequencies. Forget about the frequencies and then just keep with this. If you forget about the frequencies, you have only the second term on the right. What do you expect in this case? To be always synchronized. You see, this is a sentence that I was using in this paper. So if the oscillators are identical, then there is only one attractor of the dynamics, the fully synchronized regime, where all the phases are identical. Okay, be careful, because at the end of my talk, I will contradict myself, okay? So this was, and then you will see why I'm putting this, and then you will see at the end why we can say a quite different thing. Okay, so then this was the idea. This is a very complicated network in which you have communities, you have two different levels of communities, and then the idea here, I think it was the first time that we started realizing that there is, in the relation that actually was exploited later in many other papers, and also some contributions that I will show you later as well, in the idea that you have the structure, so you have the inherent topology of a network, you have your links, you have your edges, you have your connections. But when some dynamics is run on top of this topology, then you get something that is the representation of something which is functional. This system does something. And actually, what you can is make a kind of comparison to see, okay, here I have the structure and I have the function. When you look at the brain, you know that the brain, how the brain are connected physically, the different areas of the brain are connected. But if you make some types of measurements, so here my friend Mario and Martin know very well, so that some of the measures that you are doing on the brain are not how the different parts are connected, but how the different parts are functioning together, how they are correlated. And then you could see that there is this mapping between the structure and the function. So, and actually, this is what we were proposing, so that you have a structure, you have some dynamics, and then when you run these dynamics, then you can define a kind of dynamical connectivity matrix, which just represents how these nodes in the network were synchronized. And the result is this. And then you will see here in this video, this is the result. So green means no correlation, green means nothing at all. Then you let the system evolve, and then you see how now there will appear 16 squares, and then these 16 squares correspond to the 16 small groups that you see in this network. But now, later on, you will see how every one of these groups of 4 merge into a single group of 1, and then you have 4 groups of, let's say, of units. I don't know if it stops or just goes very slowly, but you see here how you have the 4 groups, and then, okay, we can make it faster, and then you see it is turning red, 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 and then at the end, after time has gone, you get something which is completely red, which means that now, at this time, all the network is completely synchronized, because here we are looking at the dynamical correlation. We're looking at the correlations between parts of the network. Then it's very easy to understand that at very short time scales, the correlations in the network are just in the small communities. They grow up, grow up, grow up until they get into the final state.
Sorry, is it, can I say, obvious that at the very end they have to synchronize all together because the various omegas are the same, or?
Yeah, okay. This is what I was saying in the previous
the
slide.
warning, okay.
Okay, you will see at the end of my talk how I contradict myself.
Okay.
Okay, so then this is what you get. So these are the technical details. And actually, this was helping us to identify, for instance, which is the number of connected components, which is what we plot here, and then to find relations between some topological properties and some dynamical properties in the network. And I think that actually this was among the first steps in understanding these functional relations between these types of behavior. Okay, so Let's now move into another, let's say, into a particular case, which is, this was quite general about complex networks and synchronization. Yes? Okay.
I would like to ask about the Kuramoto model. Do you use that model in a human connectome or a connectome in particular in order to? Ah, okay.
You'll see in a while. Okay. Okay. So the idea here is just introducing one of the topics of the school, which is about, let's say, mobile synchronization, in the sense that we have agents that move around, and then even with the motion, they end up being synchronized. Okay, this was interesting because, again, one of the particular properties of the particular emergent properties that one could be interested in a complex system is about synchronization, but it has also some very clear applications to what active matter is, and also to some, let's say, social phenomena. Okay. Okay, I will skip this one. I will introduce just the model that we were working at that time. It is, you can see here, it's just a kind of a Kuramoto model, but here you see that, okay, here you see the agent dynamics, they move randomly on a plane. What does it mean that they move randomly on a plane? They move randomly on a plane, and they interact according to these dynamics. You see, this is a Kuramoto model. This is weird. This is a Kuramoto model, but you see here, this is a Kuramoto model that interacts, make that the oscillators interact only if they are at a distance which is smaller than some threshold. So what we have here is that these nodes move on this two-dimensional plane, and if they are close enough, they interact according to this sinus of the phase difference. That's it. So what do we expect here? Well, what we expect here, if we keep the density of the oscillators, we keep it low, we never see a completely connected component, and then what we expect is that the evolution of the system, it will be some sort of synchronization, but not necessary. Okay, actually, what we get is a kind of a phase space with three different behaviors. Actually, this is the behavior that we can see. You see, all the oscillators now move very slowly, but then if you stop it here, you make a snapshot, you will see that neighboring oscillators have the same color. The color corresponds to the phase. You see how they are merging groups together, then they are moving around, but you see, you have never a completely connected component. But even in the case that you have never a connected component, at the end, you see how the group has synchronized. Yes? It's linear, so it's a kind of rum and tumble. Yeah. And then if you look at the second one, then the second one is very fast, so they move very fast, and then you will see, so you don't see anything now, but then suddenly you will see something. Again, you never see a connected component. But then at the end, you see how all of them have also synchronized. So this can be interpreted as a kind of dynamical transition because you have different behaviors on one side or the other. The final result is the same, but of course the efficiency of the mechanism is different in one or the other, but actually the mechanism that leads to the synchronization is very different. In this case, the mechanism is what we call local, because you have a local synchronization that grows up, and then until you get a cluster that affects all the system, or in the second one, you have it completely global from the beginning. So you have the oscillators are moving so fast that their interaction is very efficient, and then they make so the result of every single interaction a long time, and then finally they are able to get at the end. And the last one is not so interesting. The last one is the one that we could say it's a topological transition, because it corresponds to a case in which you have a completely connected network, and then in this case the motion, we can say that just helps, okay? Well, I will skip, yes?
These different cases that you are describing, do you care about the dynamics? So do you care about the coarsening laws as a function of time
Here-
to see if there are exponents and things like that that
The
can help you characterize
Okay, the difference here, wait. From the one on the left and the one on the center are the time scales.
But I mean, maybe progresses like a power law in time, and that power law has some particular exponents, and that's something that we know from condensed matter physics. So maybe
It can be checked, yeah, because that's true. That because in this case, the problem is that you cannot have a closed solution. But what we were able to find in this case is it's a problem. As I was saying before, it's a problem of time scales. So depending on because here we have two time scales. One is a time scale for the motion, and the other is a time scale for the interaction. And then it is just you play around with these two time scales, and you have one behavior or the other. Then in this case, for instance, when the motion is very fast, there is something which is called the fast switching approximation. Then you can show that the approach to synchronization is just made as a kind of the eigenvalues of the matrices of connectivity. At some point, you can look at the properties of these matrices, and then you can solve this problem. Okay, but I will skip this. So actually, this is what I was saying. There is a transition between different states, and then this is the picture exactly that Carmen was showing this morning about this work that I did in collaboration with Demian and Ignacio at our institute, in which here, this is just tries to be an explanation of what happens in active matter. So you have self-propelled particles in this sense, but so how the particles move is exactly the same way that I was saying before, kind of it depends. So if they have some tendency to move in the same direction, or you have these run and tumble properties, it can depend on the way. But the basic point here is that in my previous model, so the oscillators were moving, okay? And the phase was just an internal variable. But in this case, the phase is the direction of the motion. So then what you have is that even if you make this interaction in terms of a Kuramoto model, then you have two units moving in this direction. They will try to do it in parallel if they are close enough, and then they will move together in the same direction. So, and then in this case, there is a correlation between the internal variables and the motion of the system. And then, in this case, you get a very nice different types of behavior in the system. You get clusters, you get groups of units moving in different directions. You get stripes, you get clouds, and then you get a quite interesting phenomenology in this type of behavior. But of course, this needs much more research, because it was just a paper that we did with the basic ingredients, but this can be generalized to more successful use. Okay, now let me go to the last part to see, okay, what has to do this with the brain? And okay, I have to introduce this because it's part of the school, right? Okay, then why synchronization is so important, or why synchronization is not so important? Excuse me. Well, then we go to the property that we were talking about. This about when it's a property that actually, when there was a very nice collaboration with Mario and the other people that you will see as authors in this paper, it is this understanding, as I was saying before, between structural and functional networks. Actually, I like to say that the structural networks, what you have, and the function is just a consequence of the structure. In this paper, so it started in a collaboration in Catania, and in this paper we were just proposing something which is very similar. So it's the Kuramoto model, and with some, you see here this parameter alpha. Actually, this parameter alpha, for people working in the Kuramoto model for the years, is very well known. Actually, it's called the frustration parameter, because as you can see here, if you try to understand now which is the coupling between the units, makes that now the units will not synchronize. Okay, you have equal frequency. Then you have this frustration parameter. You don't expect the units to synchronize. Okay, then what we will observe here was that even if the units don't synchronize, what we observe is that if you run these dynamics in a system which has symmetries, And then you can see the symmetries here. So you have this very nice small graph that has no name. Here on the right, you can see something which is called the beta lattice. And then in this beta lattice has the characteristic that it's very, very symmetric. So you have, we could say, circles of symmetries because all the nodes at the distance from the center are completely equivalent. What we were observing here is that if you run these dynamics in the system, that all nodes that are symmetric, even if they are not connected, they get synchronized. And that's the reason for which we call, and I know that Jesus didn't like it, we call it remote synchronization in this case. That this remote synchronization reveals network symmetries and functional modules. Yes?
On the beta lattice, it makes a lot of sense to me because there is no frustration, there are no loops. But what if you took the same symmetry, but you added, say, connections on the entire outer boundary or something? The symmetry is unchanged, but presumably adding these loops would affect the result quite dramatically.
In this case, what you are saying, so you are introducing, you mean here in the outer layer?
Take the beta lattice and add rings of connections. The same symmetry as before now.
In this case, will be a real frustration because then you cannot get this as a solution in the stationary state. Because then what you are saying is that this will try to be advanced with this one and the other will try to be advanced with respect to the other, and then you cannot fulfill it. Okay, but if you have a triangle, you cannot fulfill this condition, then you will be always skip. But in this case, in which you have, let's say, particular, let's say, closed structures, it can be, and I can tell you that you have, okay, well, that's true. Not complete synchronization, that's true, because you have some evolution, that's right. But you have phase locking in this case, that's true. So it's the case that you have phase locking, but not synchronization.
Thank you.
No. What?
I mean, because he was asking about the presence of the loop, right?
Yeah, of the loops
but
in the outer, sorry, I mean the connection.
Right, but so the loop is arbitrarily long, so maybe in the thermodynamic limit this effect is
No, but I think, even in this case, you can have, so what can happen is it can be very sensitive to the initial conditions, but in the stationary state, you will keep a kind of a phase difference between them.
Excuse me, you say that in this symmetry, in spite of not being linked, the Asians, they are synchronized.
Yes.
They are in the same symmetrical place. But if you are looking at the Kylie tree, like
yes.
you have here, I mean, that's not true, because all of them are linked through the origin.
To the?
Through the origin.
Yes.
So it's not that they are not linked. They are
No, of course, they are not directly linked, so there is not direct link. This is what I mean. Of course,
that's right.
they
Okay.
are, you have a connected component, and then of course what you have is that all your nodes are connected to every other node.
Yeah.
But not, I mean, that usually, for instance, when I was talking about communities, you expect that the communities are groups of nodes that are very tightly connected.
Yeah.
And then of course you expect there to be fast synchronized. But in this case, what we usually you can expect is that synchronization. So, because if you look at one node here in the outer layer, and you look at another node in the outer layer, so that if you look at the distance between these nodes along the network, it's very high. But they are synchronized.
Yeah, okay,
That's
but they are synchronized in phase or some other way,
no,
like in
they, as I was
frequency?
saying, they are synchronized in frequency.
Yeah, but that's a different problem altogether, because in simple cases like, for instance, would be the ring. I mean, those that synchronize first.
Yes.
Are not those that are neighbors, but those that have similar frequencies.
Yes, but
that's the point.
Yes, but if they are not connected, but then this can be lost.
They are not connected.
This can be lost.
Yeah. So.
Okay, and actually this And then, so later than the question that was given before, so then we try to exploit this behavior in the human connectome, and then this is work with Mario, and then what we will find is, okay, you have the kind of a structural network in the brain, and then you apply these dynamics, and then you realize that applying these dynamics, and then you measure the correlations in the, let's say, and then you make this interpretation as a kind of functional network, you look at the correlations, then what we were finding is that we were looking at the correlations between different parts of the brain, and then here we just put 2 examples. And then here, there are 2 regions, these blue and red regions, which are next to each other, but they are not correlated. But then you get the region which is the green and the blue, which are far away, and then these 2 regions, according to these dynamics, they get correlated. So that we can say that the blue and the green regions, functionally, they play a similar role. Of course.
If you look at the Fourier transform of those that are synchronized, are far away synchronized,
yes,
you are going to notice that they have identical modes.
Identical?
Modes.
Okay.
So,
because it's something, of course, it's something you can translate from the topology. But the problem is also that it can depend, because there is something that you lose in the way. So because it depends on the topology, but it depends on the particular dynamical system that you are running.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, and actually, so this idea to relate the synchronization with symmetries for us was very helpful, and that's the reason for which this paper was quite successful. It is because then you can have a network, and one of the problems in complex networks is to identify symmetries. You can, from a mathematical point of view, to identify symmetries is very easy. So you have the Cayley tree, and then you know that you have symmetry groups. But when you have a brain, you have no idea on which symmetries you have, because you can say that symmetries are weak. Symmetries, from a mathematical interpretation, means that you have 2 nodes that are identical, and that they have some properties. They have the same degree, they have the same neighbors, they have the same distance to the sources, something like this. But then in physics, we can relax a little bit this interpretation of symmetry, and then what we can say is that 2 regions, in this case, 2 regions of the brain, according to this property, appear to be very symmetric, very functionally symmetric. So this is the idea to make this interpretation. So forgetting a little bit about the exact symmetry. Okay, but, as I was telling you, so I will 5 minutes more, so there have been some questions. Okay, now let's go in particular into the brain, and then what we can say more about this application of the Cura module in the brain, more on this remote synchronization. I will put you here just 2 examples. Actually, about these 2 examples, I will talk in my contribution in the workshop, but I just wanted to make you here just a brief mention of these couple of works. The first one is that this relation, so when we talk about in the brain, that the brain shouldn't be synchronized. Okay, but then one clear thing is that in the brain, there is some kind of hierarchical organization. So you have modules in the brain, and it's also because this idealization of functioning of the brain, because the brain is, of course, ideally, the brain works at all different scales. And then when we talk about synchronization, we can talk about global synchronization, and we talk about local synchronization. And then global synchronization means that you have a brain which is firing in a very synchronized way, and then there is no information about what this brain is doing, because if you have patterns of complete coherent synchronization, you have no codification of this information. But on the other hand, if your synchronization is limited to have local synchronization in the way that you have modules, you have areas of the brain that are supposed to do some functions, and then these areas of the brain don't synchronize together with other areas, but are locally synchronized, then this is when you can associate this to the different tasks, different functions that the brain can do. Of course, I have to recognize, so it's a very, very strong step. I always say the Kuramoto model and the brain, but as I was saying before, is a first step. So it's to introduce a kind of dynamical behavior that we can understand, that we can manage, that helps to see what's going on in this very complex system. So in this case, we were just proposing a very simple model, modular system, and in this modular system, it's full of Kuramoto oscillators, and then you have in every one of these modules, you have a population of Kuramoto oscillators that we try to synchronize, but then you have some connections between these modules. Okay, and actually we're reproducing the conditions of the experiments by our colleague in Barcelona, Jordi Soriano, and actually what we were doing is to introduce some sort of self-regulation in this system, which is the action of some particular type of cells when you have cultures of networks, something that is called the glial cells that can make a kind of cutting the interaction between the neurons. Or it's a particular type of neurons that can make this. And then if we take into account this possible effect of the glias, then what we find is that this system, okay, you can go, so I will go further, that if we have this regulation in this system, we can end up having this type of behavior in which we leave the units being so these modules to being internally synchronized, but not being synchronized with the neighbors. Because in this case, what we associate is that different types of correlations between the modules corresponds to different functions. In this particular case that I'm saying. I'm not saying that this corresponds to particular functions in the brain, of course, but at least in the type of culture networks that we have, that Jordi has in the lab, this can make this feeling, okay? Then we have this type of behavior, so I will skip this. Okay, and then now let me please go to my very, very last slides, and so I have started trying to convince you about complexity, right? Okay, now let's go back to the most simple things that we can imagine, to something which is topologically very, very simple, which is a circle. Okay, so this, and here is where I have to eat my own words about if the synchronized state is the only attractor of the dynamics when you have oscillators in which they have exactly the same frequency. So actually, this is this very simple system. And you can wonder what it has in special. Nothing. So if you put Kuramoto model here, you expect them to be very easily synchronized, okay? That's right. You expect to be synchronized. But I can tell you that here, in this very simple system, there are different stationary states that are not only the synchronized state. There is a kind of state which are called twisted states, in which actually what can happen is that between any pair of oscillators in the system, you can have a fixed phase difference. So it's a kind of phase locking state, but there are several of them coexisting at the same time. Okay, funny thing is that if you look at the appearance of these attractors, then you see this, so this is for different cases, but I can tell you that the volume of the basic of attraction of all these particular attractors seems to follow this kind of exponential distribution. This is just empirical. We have no reason for guessing which is the type of behavior. But it turns out to be a cut Gaussian distribution, more than exponential. Okay, for us it was very funny to find this. We were not the first that finding this, so here you get kind of a map of where the different attractors can be found. Because actually there were several papers before that were showing that even in this very simple circle, there are, even if the most simple Kuramoto model, there are other attractors. And then, actually, there is a paper, I think I have the reference next, this paper by Zhang and Steven Strogatz. They published this in 2021. They were looking at the basins of attraction, and the basins of attraction are so weird as this. What is this? So, they were looking at a circle of 81 oscillators. Why 81? I have no idea. But you can imagine you have 10 oscillators. What's difficult here? The problem now is, where are the basins of attraction? We know the volume, we know the area of the basin of attraction, but we have no idea on which are the boundaries. Where are the limits between, you Ulrike were mentioning this as well in your talks, where are the boundaries between the different basins of attraction? We can have a system of, let's say, 10 oscillators with 5 different attractors. We know, as I was saying, but how you can identify? Okay, you have 10 dimensions. Do you want to explore all the possible initial conditions in a problem of 10 dimensions? You cannot do that. And then the only thing that you can do is, let's say, make this kind of slices in your, let's say, and then you get in a 2-dimensional plane, you can see something. But what I can tell you is that you are not able to identify a single attractor in these slices in them. So, what happens here, okay, so you see, then these are the attractors, they are very rough, they are fractal, and it's very difficult to identify which are these attractors. So, the most simple model, so we have most simple problem, we have a circle, and then we find out that the complexity, it is precisely not in the state that they arrive, but precisely in the configuration of the state that gives rise to these different attractors. How these different configurations are intertwined as these initial conditions are. Okay, so this is something we can skip this. Okay, and that's it. So I hope that after this talk you are convinced that synchronization is a paradigmatic example of emergence in complex systems, and that, but actually that, okay, don't be worried about this kind of sacralized word as it's synchronization, because there is life farther than synchronization. Okay, that's it, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot. We already had a plethora of questions, but we're open for more. Young first. Young first.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about your work with the Connectome, because I believe that neurons behave more like post-coupled oscillators, right?
Yeah, sure.
So using the Kuramoto model, like, changes something?
In which case you were saying?
With the Connectome.
Yes, of course. In the Connectome, you have actually, if you want to modelize closer. But as I was saying, so the Kuramoto model gives you some idea on which is the type of behavior that you can observe. So actually, we are working now in more, let's say, in not only in the Connectome, because it's not data that they have, but I'm working with Jordi Soriano, and they are doing these cultures, these cells, and in particular with the collaboration in Japan. And then what we are looking is at models of integrate and fire oscillators, pulse-coupled oscillators, and then how this synchronization or absence of synchronization is important in this case, looking at different contributions. But that's
good. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice talk, Albert. I really enjoyed it. I have 2 questions, and both are very short. One is about in the case in which you have a simple circle, and then you have one that is different, and you see these twists.
Yes.
State. Are these twist states? I mean, what I'm trying to think is, are these like kinks? Like kinks when you talk about solitons, in which if you have a thing like this, you should need 2 kinks. No? I mean, because you got to come back to the same state.
No, it exists. That's true. That's true. So depending on the direction that you look, so you have one state. So when I talk about, so those are called twisted states. Yeah. We use when we have positive links, a twisted is calling a twist number, and then when we introduce, because I didn't explain it here, we introduce negative links. We introduce something which we call the luck number. And then the luck number can be positive in one direction or can be negative if you count in the other direction. And the two states are possible because of symmetry, for sure.
Okay. So, and another question. You mentioned in the case of neurons, that you could have, you could have synchronization in a large area, and then it will break up into local synchronization.
Yes.
Well, what I'm trying to ask is, I don't know anything about it. What I'm trying to ask is, I heard when last time that Mario was here, he gave a talk, and one of the things that caught my attention was the fact that he was mentioning that although there was a synchronized state before a crisis, just before the crisis, the synchronization went down. Do you remember that?
Yes, I will. Next week.
On Sunday.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the question was answered.
So I have a question about the first part of the talk when you show these networks that you allow the connections to also evolve.
Yes.
I'm wondering about time scales. So for instance, if I think about how to apply this in the brain, can I think about this like plasticity, for instance, and then like synchronization as the final output?
But neurons don't move. No, let's say that in this case, when I was explaining, was the answer I was giving to Carmen as well, is that what is important here is the relative time scale of the motion of the particles and the scale in which they interact. You can change these two scales, and then you have one behavior or you have the other behavior. How do you want to relate this to plasticity? As far as I understand, plasticity in this case means that you have something that evolves, and then you can be in some state. Let's say you are close to an attractor, and then this plasticity means that if you then make a perturbation on the system, then you are expected to recover the attractor that you were, okay? But in this case, I don't know how to relate this with plasticity.
Yeah, it would be maybe changing more the structure, like the modular structure of the network. So if you can create more, create or break connections in the network and like change the modularity, then you can.
Yes, but in the modularity, let's say that I would say that in this case, if you refer to the last part, this of neurons in the brain, when you have the different modules, in this case, I would say that precisely what we obtain is not plasticity. Look. Look, so actually here what we put is the heat map of correlations between the nodes. Then you see here, at this time of 500, you see some map of correlations. But then if you look at the different time windows, you see a different map of correlations. So then this means that here, between these two states, the glias has act. The glias act, they cut some of the connections, and then the system evolves into a different attractor. This can happen because perhaps the effect of the glias is too strong. Of course, you can have an attractor, you can look at the plasticity, but if the perturbation that you put into this attractor is strong enough, then you can kick it up of the attractor. Because this is also what happens in physiological systems in general. They are sensitive to small perturbations, but if you, let's say, if you perturb it stronger, then you can make it switch to another attractor. which I think this is what happens in this case. You move to a different attractor.
Thank you for the very nice colloquium. I have a curiosity about the mechanism for synchronizing different communities in the complex network, for instance. You have a community here that interacts locally here and synchronize, and another community that is also synchronized, but they are not synchronized with each other. And then there is some mechanism that allows the both of them to synchronize. Do you have a, can you give me some intuition for this? Or?
Yes, because it's just how the signals are, let's say, are propagated in this complex network. So actually, I didn't show it here, but one of the strong results of this contribution precisely was to show that there is a relationship between the time scales that we have in the system and the eigenvalues of the Laplacian matrix of the network. There is almost, I would say, there's a one-to-one correlation. So in our case, it was very useful to interpret this because you say, okay, we have something which is static. We have a network. We can measure the Laplacian, and then from the Laplacian, now we can measure the eigenvalues, okay? Then you can plot the eigenvalues, and then you would see a picture like this. So this straight line here, plot the distribution of the eigenvalues. And then now you look at the evolution of the number of connected components in this interpretation, and you see exactly the same. So that's the reason for which you can map the topology, in this case, to the dynamics. And then interpreting that the dynamics, it is the dynamics of synchronization, which is very close. I have to say, the dynamics of synchronization is very close to dynamics of diffusion, which is the most simple case, because diffusion is linear, and then you can interpret diffusion in terms of the let's say, of the eigenvalues. That's it. And then in this case, it was very clear to us that there is this map between the topology and this type of evolution. Of course, if you put a different dynamical system, it's not so clear. You can get some hints, but it's not so clear that you get this practically one-to-one map.
Got it. Thank you.
So you just talked about this kind of changes in patterns, so over time, and you mentioned that it could be that a perturbation would kick it in another basin of attraction. Now, if I understood you correctly, so then there was no noise in the system, and there was also, this is purely deterministic. So
no, there is noise. There is noise in this system.
There is noise.
There is noise in this system.
Okay, so because then it would be a noise-induced transition, what you would see probably, or what would you think? Because this is normal when you have different coexisting attractors.
That's
so
true.
You can just jump between different attractors. Is this a possibility here?
Yeah, actually something that I wanted to look in particular to this, and it's related to the question that she was making before, is that, okay, this is the picture, so this is the heat map that we get just after the removal, so the effect of the glias. So how long this pattern can be identified, we don't know. So my idea is that if this pattern stays for some time, then you have a transition. You have a transition from one pattern to another pattern. How stable are these patterns? We don't know. But that's, of course, this is right. Because I have the intuition that if you want to make something which makes sense in these dynamics of the brain and so, there has to be this type, plasticity is very important, but there's also this recovery. You have patterns, because patterns are memories in this case. You have memories, and then, of course, but you don't have one memory, you have many memories. And then memory should be stable up to some point. Memory should be stable, but then if you perturb it strongly enough, then you get different memories.
Okay, thanks.
More questions? Okay, so perhaps I can conclude with a very, how can I say, general questions.
I will end up with a commercial break. Can I end up with a commercial break?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, so I wanted to thank to all my collaborators. So, and if you want to construct such a nice network of your own collaborations, then you can use our application, which is called this complemetrics.net, and then you can get beautiful maps of network collaborations between the authors, topics, institutions, and even interdisciplinarity. So,
thanks a lot.
Okay, it's here. Ah, okay. I know this.